in loose federations as an academic exercise for building a new Cyprus. I have to say, I'm very pessimistic. My conclusion is very pessimistic. However, I want to present an academic model for a feasible solution of the Cyprus problem. There are 6 parts to my presentation. To save time, I'm going to skip some of them. Introduction. I have my own views about the Cyprus problem as everybody else does. I'm not sure exactly what is meant by the term Cyprus, except a map, a piece of territory in the global context. Whether it is one country, one nation, the identity problem we talked about, a divided country, a failed state. But I want to consider, in particular, prospects for the future. In Cyprus, there is an oversupply of flags, identities, and competing ethno-nationalism, including the map here, not that far from this university. In the Greek part of the island in the south, schooling is based on the classical Greek curriculum, and it produces utopian visions, ethno-nationalistic, reinforced by religion. But the important thing is that in discourse, in discussions, whether it is academic or between individuals, there is a tyranny of terminology. I don't have time to go into it. We are living in occupied part of the island, beyond the control of government as far as EU is concerned. This is part of the tyranny of terminology. I cannot go into all these details. One of the myths, one of the sacred cows in the south is 18%. You are only 18% of the population. This is a dogma, and therefore the political question arising from the 18% mythology is, how can 82% be treated equally with 18%? Move on. Cyprus problem is a very complex problem, multidimensional. In particular, it's about land and territory, different maps. This is the map presented in Switzerland by the Greek Cypriots. Okay, they want not only the south, but not only Güzelyurt, Morpho, but as well Karpas. The Turkish Cypriot map that was exchanged has never been published. We don't know, it was later on withdrawn. We don't know what the Turkish Cypriot map is. How is it different from the divided island? We talked about the hydrocarbon wealth, another major dimension of the Cyprus conflict. I'm not going to go into it. What I want to say is that power sharing has been tried and failed at least 3 times. The first one, what we call the joint or partnership republic, that lasted only 3 years, was basically based on shared sovereignty. This is a very important concept to me. What failed was shared sovereignty. And the situation today is no different than summer 1963. when Makarios presented the 13 points, basically removing the Turkish constitutional rights. Nothing different. So that's why I call it a failed state, because nobody knows what is the constitution of Cyprus. Annan Plan was the second time that power sharing failed. You know all that. I'm not going to take any time over it. Now we come to the latest and the failure in Switzerland. Okay? When the Secretary General declared a failed conference, and the Turkish side said, within these parameters, the UN parameters, there is no hope for solving the Cyprus problem. We need a new agenda. And I'm offering the confederation model as an idea whose time has come. This is the time of searching for new agenda. This is the time to be creative and look ahead at feasible solutions. I'm not saying that my model is the answer. It is simply an academic exercise, and it is intended to stimulate discussion and discourse. I published an article on this that was published in Cyprus Mail a few months ago. It's a time of reflection. So the latest position, I'm now going to go a little bit more slowly because this is my original contribution. Confederal models. No federal, confederal ideal model exists. Every single case, and there are many examples of federations and confederations in the world, every single case is unique. It requires, first and foremost, creativity. Secondly, and equally importantly, goodwill and mutual trust. Okay? I'm going to, because I live in Canada, in fact, I did a lot of research, starting with my PhD thesis back in 1965, 66, on federal provincial agreements. I have a good understanding of how the Canadian confederal system works. Okay? European Union itself is another example of confederation. I want to make sure that we understand why confederal system is a good promise for Cyprus. It will result in win-win. For the Greek Cypriots, they will retain their own self-governing government as it exists at the moment. No dislocation, no minimal costs of adjustment. Likewise, the self-governing Turkish part of Cyprus remains as is. No adjustment costs. The public debt, which is huge in the south, which is very significant in the north, remains their own responsibility. So the Turkish Cypriots do not become a financial burden on the south, or Turkish Cypriots do not assume responsibility for the huge amount of debt which the Greek Cypriot regime owes to the EU or to the World Bank or Russia. The guarantee system remains in effect, but modified to basically guarantee only the Turkish north. There is an agreed border between. So I believe that confederation, a loose federation, starting from where you are at the moment, is the best way forward, and it will result in win-win. But what do the Greek Cypriots want? They said "ohi" repeatedly to power sharing. They said Ohi to federation, 2004. I'm sure they will say Ohi to confederation. Okay? What Greek Cypriots want is unitary state, and the clock put back to 1965-66. Okay? They regard Turkish Cypriots 18% because that was the population share at that time. Now, there's a lot of literature on federalism. I'm particularly interested in fiscal federalism as it works in Canada, where the federal government collects taxes on behalf of the provinces, one tax collecting agency, and it distributes the revenue on the basis of cooperation agreements, federal provincial agreements.
Professor, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Canadian fiscalism, as I say, it's essentially money is used to sustain the federation. The EU model, is based on solidarity agreements. The Swiss model is a very, very interesting example. The Federal Council, the Swiss Federal Council, is 7-member executive, each member representing one of the cantons. And they represent sovereignty. The Swiss Federal Council is vested with Swiss sovereignty. Okay, and the position of federal president rotates annually amongst members of the Federal Council. Now, I now come to Confederal Republic of Cyprus, my vision. 2 equal founding states, not constituent states, founding states. The key elements: 2 self-governing states, Confederal Council vested with shared sovereignty as in the 1960 Constitution, with 2 co-presidents. Okay? Overlooking confederal conferences and agreements. There is a dispute settlement mechanism. There is Turkish North, as is now, substantially. Okay, all the residual powers in the Greek South. There can be a cooperation agreement over hydrocarbons. There can be tax agreements, as in the Canadian case. Foreign relations, crime management. If there's a murder and the perpetrator moves to the other side, can be handled through a cooperation agreement, and all kinds of other examples. Basically, this is what I want to say, and I now come to the end. I don't believe at the moment there is any hope of implementing anything like this. Okay? The egg is broken. It cannot be put back together again unless the system of education changes, unless there is a cultural transformation, unless there is mutual trust, because confederations are the most difficult systems of governance. Thank you for listening to me.